Kind of an unusual weather pattern for June, the return of a moderate risk across the southeastern U.S., which is typically an early spring type pattern. We've had a couple of reports of tornadoes through the day in southeastern Alabama, southwestern Georgia, and one little touchdown just south of Texarkana. This is that cell in northern Louisiana moving east-southeast, and you can see that outflow boundary it's laying down right there. Mostly severe thunderstorm warnings on that, but as we get towards the last 15 minutes or so, it does take on a very hailstorm-like appearance. You can see a lot of those purples there, indicating wet, rimed ice. And that's it right there. Maximum estimated hail size looks to be about 1 to 2 inches. Looking further east, clusters of severe storms from west central Alabama into the southeastern part of the state, and they appear to take on a little bit more of a supercellular appearance. That's those cells, and we go a little bit further to the east. Got this one tornado warning near Tifton. And there's a look at that storm there on the Moody Air Force Base radar, southwestern Georgia. That definitely has a supercellular appearance. Same with this other storm to the west, and again with that storm further out there in the western part of the state. So that's going to be the inflow concavity right there, updraft, and then we have this counterclockwise circulation. That's going to be the mesocyclone right in there. So we zoom in, look at the velocity, and we don't see any really strong gate-to-gate shears, but that is the mesocyclone right there. And it does have the potential for continued development. And those just aren't idle words. If we look at the updraft region right there and go up to higher tilts, we find intense storm tops over the top of that inflow region. So the storm definitely has a strong weak echo region, and that's what we consider a significant severe structure. There's our climate indices. Looks like the NAO, PNA, Arctic oscillation, those are all fairly neutral. El Nino, well, that's coming for sure as we go into fall and winter. And the Matt-Julian oscillation is near 4. That's going to shift into a indeterminate state. Phase 4, that tends to be associated with not much of anything in the summertime. Maybe a little bit wet in parts of Texas, maybe the same up in northern Maine. But we can't draw too many associations because it is kind of an anomalous pattern. And there's that anomalous pattern, severe weather in the southeast, jet stream across that region, active cold front through the central Rockies into the Great Basin area, and smoke up in Minnesota, and a cold core low in New York. That is not really much of a typical mid-June pattern. We should be shifting gears into summer. The upper air pattern has a few clues to what's going on. A very blocky, high-amplitude pattern. Look at those waves. North and south, north and south. Even out there off the Atlantic, it is a little bit high amplitude. And we've got the strong southern stream system. That should be shut down by now. We should be seeing ridging building in from Mexico. Well, that's not the case, and that's given this early May pattern that we're enduring at the present time, and a strong jet there that may play into the weather as we get into around Friday and Saturday, but we'll look at that shortly. Looking at the weather in the Northeast, where is the tropical air? Well, I'm not sure I see any. By tropical air, we are talking about 60s dew points, temperatures in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I don't see any of that. I do see some warm weather in Boston, 75 over 57. However, to find that tropical air, that's probably going to be offshore. So that tells us that we're north of the polar front. That puts us back in a occlusion area near a cold core low. You can see the wind spiraling into this area right here. And if we go up to 500 millibars, there it is, upper level low over New York around Albany, around Kingston, and the temperatures up at that level are below minus 16. So the lapse rate's just steep enough to support showers and a few storms. And there's the satellite loop. You can certainly see the center of that low pressure area right about there. Why am I getting a phone call? It's probably a telemarketer. Dry slot working around the south side. The warm conveyor belt flowing around the north side. And further out to the west, smoke from those persistent Canadian wildfires. So that's what it looks like on the surface analysis. This air mass across New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, that's all going to be this post-frontal air that's going to be recycled Canadian air. You can tell that by the 50s dew points. The dew points kind of act as a tracer for the air mass source region. We do find the front around North Carolina, and we get into the tropical sector right there. You can see those temperatures and dew points up near 85 over 65. Going further south, we get in that cluster of storms right there, and the rich, pure tropical air that's over Florida. You can see that southerly flow indicating the Caribbean source region. And there's the action in that part of the country. Numerous cells from Georgia all the way back towards Louisiana, and near the sea breeze out there in eastern Florida, also some thunderstorms underway. They're also benefiting from the slightly enhanced upper level flow. And that's about it for that part of the country, although heat advisories are in effect for southern Florida. It's a combination of those low 90s temperatures with mid to upper 70s dew points, so it gives us a very sultry air mass. And closer to that area of thunderstorms, the outflow boundary, that's kind of hard to pick out, maybe something like this. That would be my first guess. And there's also going to be a boundary on the backside that's going to be roughly something like that. I'm looking at the cooler temperatures, 73 for example, 69. 68, that's all rain-cooled air. And in the center of that, we're going to find a series of meso-highs. And that's high pressure that drives that large cold pool that radiates away from the center of that storm complex. Moving westward into Mississippi, we catch the tail end of that thunderstorm area starting to move into Mississippi, and we pick out that frontal boundary, and that's going to run about like that. This region right here, that's in the wake of this cell here. It tracked through that region, Texarkana, Monroe earlier this afternoon, and that kind of distorted the wind field a little bit. But the location of the front right in there. All right, so moving out west into Texas, well, we do find some hot weather up to 105 at this hour in Junction, 103 at Laredo and Cotulla, and 102 down there in the Big Bend. Now, there is a separate system as we go further out there in New Mexico, but perhaps this will refresh your memory a little bit. A front from Atlanta to Dallas and trailing back towards Albuquerque. You can see the cool temperatures in the Texas Panhandle, a northerly wind component, and somewhat of a cyclonic flow there in New Mexico, outlining the location of that low. And we're going by the thickness gradient. If we look at those dashed red lines, it paints out this gradient that runs about like that, and that defines a baroclinic zone. And that, in turn, supports an upper-level jet. So that's where that's coming from. There's a weak cold front. The air mass back in this region heavily worked over. That's all heavily modified maritime polar air. So at this point, it's basically a transitional air mass. And you can see the temperatures back there are fairly warm, 94 to 96 at Tucson and Phoenix. And that helps to support that mid and upper level jet that we see right there, indicated by the height gradient. Definitely some improvement in the weather in Texas. We had day after day of thunderstorm activity near San Angelo, Brownwood. It looks like we're getting another round starting to develop south and southeast of Dallas. So another round of thunderstorms underway, and that could affect the Tyler Longview area this evening. And we can see drier air further out to the west. That gets back towards that weak frontal system. Then as we go further north, we get closer to that upper level low and steeper lapse rates in that area. And some of that smoke from Canada has made it into western Kansas. So there's our new thunderstorms, basically from Kaufman to Waxahachie, and they do look a little bit elevated. Now the echo tops, those are pretty high, up to about 40,000 feet, so there is definitely vertical development on that. The velocity fields, it's probably still too early to look at that, but they are developing, and they will be tracking into northeast Texas. Heading into the north-central U.S., wildfire smoke, especially around Minneapolis-St. Paul, up to Green Bay, and into the UP of Michigan. And it looks like some of that curls around back towards Bismarck as well. And it's definitely having a big impact on the surface chart, a large area of IFR conditions and visibility below 3 miles. Looking pretty good in the southwestern states, except up there in Nevada and Utah, where we have numerous showers and storms. There is still a red flag warning in the El Paso area, basically in this region right there. It is quite dry, and that's been an ongoing issue for weeks now. And in Albuquerque, we're looking at the 5th latest start for 90-degree temperatures, and that may happen on Sunday. And of course, we do have a frontal system underway through that part of the country. We saw that on the surface chart. Let me just pull that up. And there it is. Temperatures behind it, 50s, 60s, and low 70s. And very windy back there in western Montana. Gusts up to 45 knots at Cut Bank, up to 30 at Great Falls. And we do have wind advisories all the way down through eastern Idaho, where we have gusts up to 35 knots. And we actually do have a frost advisory for tonight in northeastern Nevada. I don't think anybody really lives up there because that's north of Elko in ranching country, but they will be down to about 34 degrees tonight. Heading up north into the great western Canadian region, looks mild, temperatures in the 50s and 60s, and we transition into much cooler air north of this frontal system out there in the Gulf of Alaska, and a new front coming into the Nome and Tin City area. But that's still offshore. Heading out east into Canada looks cool, temperatures in the 30s and 40s. So that's going to be a little bit below normal, although 55 in Cambridge Bay, that is fairly warm. A major weather system going through Greenland, we don't see that too often. A large area of snow on the Greenland ice pack. And then dropping south into Quebec, a strong frontal system in the western part of the province. Cold air coming back in behind it into Ontario, and that's helping to drive this front, which will have a big impact for Thursday and Friday, so we're going to cover that now. Before we do that, let's take a quick look at the tropical outlook. 7-day NHC forecast not showing anything. The GFS is forecasting an easterly wave to start developing right about here. That's going to be on the 19th. And it approaches the Windward Islands around the 22nd, and then moves into the Caribbean around the 24th. So that could have some effect as it reaches Nicaragua, Honduras, and Cuba. We'll have to see what happens. The GFS has not really been all that reliable beyond about 120 hours. So this is the 500 millibar heights and vorticity. This gives us the weather at a glance, looking at weather up at about 5 kilometers, about 18,000 feet. And this basically shows us where the energy in the atmosphere is. There's the southern stream driving that severe activity. And then we've got these troughs, one up there in Alberta, the other in New York. So here's how it evolves going into tomorrow. That's going to be tomorrow afternoon. Well, not a whole lot of change, but we do have this one trough diving down from Ontario. That's tied in with that cold front that we just looked at in that part of the Canadian region. And this is really going to start deepening this East Coast trough. When you bring a smaller scale trough into the back of a larger one, that causes the whole thing to amplify. And looks like a little cutoff low off the Southern California coast as well. But the real weather will be coming into Washington and Oregon for Saturday and Sunday. Look at those height falls up in that region. A big upper level low sinking southeast and into Oregon and Washington. So that's going to spell rain, cooler temperatures, and windy weather for much of the northwestern U.S. And by Sunday and Monday, highs in Idaho will only be in the 60s, looking for a high of about 65 in Boise for Monday. So this will have major impacts on the northwestern region. Not so much in the southwestern states. We'll have to check that out on the Friday show. But strong ridging through the central part of the country, and that spells a decline in thunderstorm activity in that part of the country, and unsettled out east. So again, we're looking at about Tuesday here, and this will give you the weather for the rest of the week. The big thing that I see here is high amplitude pattern continuing. This is a very blocky pattern. So this means a continuation of the anomalous weather with patterns locking up from day to day. And that'll give us a lot of stuff to look at as we go into next week. And one development we'll be focusing on going into the weekend, look at those temperatures in Texas. We're starting to see widespread hundreds. There's Saturday and there's Sunday. And it just gets worse. By Monday, even Louisiana around Alexandria seeing hundreds, which is kind of rare in that area. And Tuesday, mid to upper 100s in the Big Country and the Concho Valley. So this looks pretty bad, and the Dakotas and Minnesota not spared either. And there's one last check of the storms. Looks like a split is underway north of Canton. You can see that cell up to the north there starting to move that way. And we've got a tornado warning, which has just been issued for near Canton, that will track down towards Tyler. All right, I've got to get this rendered and uploaded, so feel free to monitor the weather and track this developing system. I'll leave you with some footage taken in San Antonio yesterday out there in the hill country. Very beautiful footage. Thanks to Greg for that clip. And I want to thank our newest Patreon supporter, Thomas Jagger. Thank you very much for helping us support that program. And Thomas, like everybody who supports the program, gets access to our private Monday show. So that's one little perk that will help you, those who are supporting the program. Hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday evening, and we'll see you back here on Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.